Question 1. Treaty law and state responsibility. During an emergency response where multiple areas are impacted, a state unilaterally suspends a multilateral treaty, citing an urgent national security concern. Other treaty members challenge the suspension, arguing that it violates international legal norms. Under the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties (ELT), which of the following is the most accurate legal assessment of this situation? A state may unilaterally suspend any treaty obligation if it deems the treaty incompatible with its immediate national security concerns. B. A state may suspend a treaty obligation only if a fundamental change of circumstances, rebus sic stantibus, has occurred as recognized under Article 62 of the ELT. C. A state cannot unilaterally suspend a treaty under any circumstances and must always seek the consent of parties. D. A state may suspend a treaty if another party has materially breached the treaty, but not based on unilateral security concerns alone. Answer: B. A state may suspend a treaty obligation only if a fundamental change of circumstances, rebus sic stantibus, has occurred as recognized under Article 62 of the VLT. Explanation: the principle of pacta sunt servanda, Article 26 of the ELT, states that treaties must be observed in good faith. However, Article 62 allows for the suspension or termination of a treaty in cases of a fundamental change of circumstances, but only if the change was unforeseeable at the time the treaty was concluded. The change radically alters the extent of obligations under the treaty. National security concerns alone do not automatically justify suspension unless they meet these strict conditions. If the security threat is linked to another party's material breach, Article 60, suspension could be justified, but unilateral action must still be legally defensible. Why the yellow options are incorrect. A. Incorrect because unilateral security concerns are not a blanket justification under international law. C. Incorrect because treaty suspension is possible under exceptional circumstances. D. Incorrect because material breach by another party is a separate justification under Article 60, which is not relevant here. Question 2. International criminal law and universal jurisdiction. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in prosecuting international crimes, a human rights organization highlights a case where a foreign national accused of genocide is arrested in a country with no direct connection to the crime. The arrest is justified under the principle of universal jurisdiction. Which of the following best describes the legal basis? A universal jurisdiction allows any state to prosecute individuals for international crimes regardless of where the crime occurred or the nationality of the perpetrator. B. Universal jurisdiction applies only to crimes committed in international waters or airspace. C. Universal jurisdiction applies only if the prosecuting state has a bilateral extradition agreement with the accused's home country. D. Universal jurisdiction invalid under international law unless approved by the United Nations Security Council. Answer: A universal jurisdiction allows any state to prosecute individuals for international crimes regardless of where the crime occurred or the nationality of the perpetrator. Explanation: Universal jurisdiction is a key principle in international criminal law, allowing states to prosecute individuals accused of particularly heinous crimes such as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, regardless of where the crime committed or the nationality of the accused or the victims. This principle is recognized in the Geneva Conventions, which obligate states to prosecute grave breaches. Precedents like Belgium v. Senegal Eich 2012, where the International Court of Justice confirmed that states have an obligation to either prosecute or extradite under universal jurisdiction. The Pinochet case UK 1998-1999 affirms that crimes like torture are subject to universal jurisdiction. Why the other options are incorrect. B. Incorrect because universal jurisdiction is not limited to crimes in international waters or airspace. C. Incorrect because universal jurisdiction does not require a bilateral extradition agreement. D. Incorrect because universal jurisdiction does not require UNSC approval. It is a recognized customary international principle. Question 3. Law of the sea and maritime jurisdiction. In an environment where different components must interact, a coastal state extends its enforcement operations into its exclusive economic zone, seizing a foreign vessel suspected of illegal fishing. The vessel's flag state protests, arguing that the coastal state lacks enforcement jurisdiction under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea (UNCLOS). Which of the following is most legally accurate position? A. The coastal state has full sovereignty over its seas, allowing it to enforce all domestic laws, including criminal law, against foreign vessels. B. The coastal state may regulate economic activities like fishing in its seas, but must adhere to specific and close enforcement mechanisms when detaining foreign vessels. C. The coastal state has no jurisdiction over foreign vessels in its seas and must rely on the flag state to take enforcement action. D. The flag state has superior jurisdiction over its vessel in the seas, and the coastal state's enforcement actions are illegal under UNCLOS. Answer: B. The coastal state may regulate economic activities like fishing in its seas, but must adhere to specific UNCLOS enforcement mechanisms when detaining foreign vessels. Explanation: under UNCLOS 1982, the exclusive economic zone extends up to 200 nautical miles from the baseline, granting the coastal state sovereign rights over economic resources, e.g., fishing, oil exploration. However, this does grant full sovereignty, as the seas remains part of the high seas for navigational purposes. Relevant legal provisions. Article 56 grants the coastal state rights over natural resources and jurisdiction over marine environmental protection. Article 73 allows enforcement actions, boarding, inspection, arrest, and judicial proceedings, but requires prompt release of detained vessels and crew upon posting of reasonable bond. In cases like ME Virginia G. Itler's 2014, international courts have upheld that enforcement must be proportional and follow due process. Unlawful detention can lead to international claims against the coastal state, while the other options are correct. A. Incorrect because the seas is not equivalent to full sovereignty. C. Incorrect because the coastal state has the right to regulate and enforce laws on resource management. D. Incorrect because flag states do not have exclusive jurisdiction over seas activities. Question 4. In a high-stakes environment where multiple challenges must be addressed simultaneously, a state is accused of violating its treaty obligations under a bilateral investment treaty (BIT) by expropriating a foreign company's assets without adequate compensation. The state argues that its actions were necessary due to an economic crisis and claims sovereign immunity. The investor seeks recourse through international arbitration under the Internationals for settlement of investment disputes (ICSID). Which of the following statements best represents the legal position under international investment law? A. The state's claim of sovereign immunity prevents any arbitration proceedings from taking place, as sovereign immunity applies absolutely to all disputes involving sovereign state. B. Under customary international law, state has an absolute right to expropriate foreign investments without compensation during an economic crisis, provided the expropriation serves public purpose. C. The investor can initiate arbitration under the BIT. Sovereign immunity does not apply to treaty-based arbitration, and expropriation without compensation is breach of international investment law. D. The ICSID arbitration tribunal lacks jurisdiction because expropriation disputes must be resolved exclusively in the domestic courts of the host state. Answer: C. The investor can initiate arbitration under the BIT, as sovereign immunity does not apply to treaty-based arbitration, and expropriation without compensation is a breach of international investment law. Explanation: international investment law, particularly under BITs and the ICSID Convention, limits the ability of a state to invoke sovereign immunity in investor-state disputes. Sovereign immunity applies primarily to adjudicate domestic courts but does not preclude treaty-based arbitration. Under BITs, expropriation must meet 4 conditions to be lawful. 1. It must serve a public purpose. 2. Be non-discriminatory. 3. Be carried out under due process. And 4. Involve prompt, adequate, and effective compensation. The state's economic crisis does not absolve it from compensating the investor. The ICSID has consistently ruled that sovereign immunity does not bar arbitration under an investment treaty. Therefore, options correctly reflects the legal position. Question 5. During an emergency response where multiple areas are impacted by an ongoing armed conflict, a military force engaged in hostilities against an insurgent group uses cluster munitions in a densely populated civilian area. A military claims that the attack was necessary to eliminate a strategic target, while human rights organizations argue that the attack violated international humanitarian law. Under IHL, which of the following statements best applies to this situation? A. The attack is lawful because insurgents do not enjoy protection under IHL, and military necessity justifies the use of any weapons against them. B. The attack may constitute a violation of IHL because indiscriminate weapons, such as cluster munitions, cannot distinguish between military targets and civilians. C. The attack is lawful as long as the military warned civilians in advance, even if it resulted in significant civilian casualties. The principle of proportionality does not apply in non-international armed conflicts, so states have unrestricted discretion in targeting insurgents. Answer B. The attack may constitute a violation of IHL because indiscriminate weapons, such as cluster munitions, cannot distinguish between military targets and civilians. Explanation. International humanitarian law, IHL, as codified in the Geneva Conventions and additional protocols, prohibits indiscriminate attacks that fail to distinguish between military targets and civilians. Cluster munitions are controversial due to their failure rate. It leaves unexploded ordnance that continues to harm civilians post-conflict. The principle of distinction requires that attacks be directed only at combatants and military objectives. The principle of proportionality prohibits attacks where civilian harm is excessive in relation to the military advantage gained. The Convention on Cluster Munitions, 2008, further restricts their use due to their indiscriminate nature. Therefore, B is the answer, as the use of cluster munitions in a civilian area is likely a violation of IHL. Question 6. While investigating a complicated issue between different jurisdictions, an international criminal tribunal is faced with the challenge of prosecuting a high-ranking official accused of crimes against humanity. The official claims that, as the sitting head of state, they are immune from prosecution under international law. Which of the following best represents the legal position on head of state immunity in cases of international crimes? A. Heads of state enjoy absolute immunity and cannot be prosecuted for crimes against humanity before any international tribunal. B. Immunity applies only in national courts, but under international law, heads of state can be prosecuted for crimes such as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. C. A head of state's immunity depends on whether their country has ratified the Rome Statute of the International Court. D. Under customary international law, head of state immunity can only be lifted by the United Nations Security Council. Answer. B. Immunity applies only in national courts, but under international law, heads of state can be prosecuted for crimes such as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Explanation. Under international law, head of state immunity applies primarily in domestic courts but does not extend to prosecutions for international crimes before international tribunals. The Rome Statute of the Article 27 states that official capacity, including that of a head of state, does not exempt an individual from criminal responsibility for crimes such as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Additionally, the International Court of Justice has recognized limitations on immunity in cases involving serious international crimes. The Nuremberg trials Eichte and Eichte have further established that individuals, including state leaders, are held accountable for crimes under international law. Thus, B is the correct answer. Question 7. When implementing backup procedures across various maritime zones, a coastal state enacts a law imposing restrictions on foreign vessels passing through its exclusive economic zone, citing environmental protection concerns. However, a foreign-flagged commercial ship continues to transit through the EEZ, arguing that it has a right to freedom of navigation under international law. Which of the following statements best reflects the framework governing this dispute? A. The coastal state has full sovereignty over its EEZ and can restrict foreign vessels from passing through it at its discretion. B. The foreign vessel has an absolute right to freedom of navigation in the EEZ and the coastal state has no legal basis to impose restrictions. C. The coastal state has the right to regulate certain activities in the EEZ, but it cannot prohibit innocent passage unless environmental damage is imminent. Answer. C. The coastal state has the right to regulate certain activities in the EEZ, but it cannot prohibit innocent passage unless environmental damage is imminent. Explanation. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, the exclusive economic zone EEZ extends 200 nautical miles from a coastal state's baseline, while the coastal state has sovereign rights over natural resources and jurisdiction over environmental protection. It must respect the freedom of navigation of foreign vessels. Article 58(1) of UNCLOS allows all states to exercise freedom of navigation in the EEZ, but Article 56(1) permits the coastal state to enact laws concerning marine environmental protection. However, restrictions must comply with international law and cannot impose an outright ban on innocent passage unless there is an imminent threat. C is the correct answer as it aligns with the EEZ legal framework under UNCLOS. Question 8. During a high-stakes negotiation where multiple stakeholders have competing interests, a multinational corporation seeks to acquire significant share in a foreign country's telecommunications sector. However, the host government imposes strict foreign ownership restrictions and requires a minimum percentage of local ownership. The corporation argues that such restrictions violate international trade agreements and constitute indirect expropriation. Under international investment law, which of the following best describes the legal position? A. The host government has full sovereignty over its economy and can impose any foreign ownership restrictions without violating international law. B. The restrictions may constitute indirect expropriation if they deprive the corporation of substantial economic benefits without adequate compensation. C. The corporation has an absolute right to invest in the telecommunications sector under the World Trade Organization (WTO) Group, overriding national laws. D. Investment treaties do not apply to the telecommunications sector, so the corporation has no legal basis to challenge the restrictions. Answer: B. The restrictions may constitute indirect expropriation if they deprive the corporation of substantial economic benefits without adequate compensation. Explanation: Under international investment law, particularly bilateral investment treaties, BITs, and free trade agreements, a host state has the right to regulate its economy, but such regulations must comply with international obligations. Indirect expropriation occurs when a state's regulatory actions significantly deprive an investor of the economic benefits of their investment even without formal nationalization. Foreign ownership restrictions can be lawful if they serve legitimate public interest, e.g., national security, economic stability. However, if the restrictions are excessive, discriminatory, or unreasonably deprive investors of expected returns without compensation, they may violate investment protection clauses in BITs or free trade agreements, FTAs. The WTO's General Agreement on Trade in Services (GATS) allows member states to set ownership limits but requires transparency and non-discrimination. Since the corporation may argue indirect expropriation, B is the correct answer. Question 9. While evaluating a complex decision-making process involving ethical concerns, a pharmaceutical company seeks approval for a new drug that has shown promising results but has only undergone limited clinical trials. Regulatory agencies express concerns over safety, while the company argues that delaying approval could cost lives. How should the principle of precaution be applied in this case under public health regulations? A. The drug should be approved immediately, as any delay in treatment could result in unnecessary deaths. B. The precautionary principle requires regulatory agencies to demand further safety data before approval, even if it slows access. C. The pharmaceutical company's assessment of the benefits should be sufficient for approval without additional regulatory oversight. D. Once initial trials show promise, regulators must approve the drug and monitor its effects post-market rather than delaying approval. Answer: B. The precautionary principle requires regulatory agencies to demand further safety data before approval, even if it slows access. Explanation: The precautionary principle, widely recognized in public health and environmental law, states that when there is scientific uncertainty regarding potential risks, regulatory action should prioritize safety over immediate benefits. Regulatory agencies must assess the balance between urgency and long-term safety before approving new drugs. The FDA, EMA, and who require robust clinical trials before approving drugs to ensure efficacy and safety. Approving a drug too early could lead to unforeseen side effects, causing public harm and legal liability. Even in emergencies, emergency use authorizations (EUA) require substantial preliminary data. Thus, B is the best answer as it aligns with public health principles. Question 10. During an investigation where multiple factors must be considered, a cybersecurity agency discovers a major data breach affecting millions of users. The affected company claims it followed industry standards, but regulators argue it failed to implement adequate safeguards. Under data protection laws, what legal responsibilities does the company have? A. The company is not liable as long as it can prove it followed minimum industry standards. B. Data protection laws require companies to implement appropriate security measures, and failure to do so could lead to liability. C. Since the breach was caused by a cyber attack, the company is automatically exempt from liability. D. Data breaches are considered unavoidable, so companies cannot be held accountable under privacy laws. Answer: B. Data protection laws require companies to implement appropriate security measures, and failure to do so could lead to liability. Explanation: under data protection laws such as EU General Data Protection Regulation (GDPR) and US state privacy laws. Companies must ensure reasonable security measures to protect user data. Article 32 DDO requires organizations to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to safeguard personal data. Even if company follows some industry standards, failure to anticipate and mitigate foreseeable risks may result in regulatory fines and liability. Negligence in cybersecurity measures, including lack of encryption, poor network security, or failure to notify users of breaches, can lead to penalties. Since the company must take proactive security measures, B is correct. Question 11. During a crisis response where multiple agencies must coordinate, a major hurricane causes widespread flooding, displacing thousands of residents. The federal government, state authorities, and non-governmental organizations and GOs struggle to allocate resources effectively. What is the most effective coordination strategy in such a disaster scenario? A. Each agency should act independently to maximize efficiency in their areas of expertise. B. A centralized command structure, such as an incident command system, should be established to streamline decision-making. C. State governments should take full control of disaster response as they are closest to the affected populations. D. And GOs should lead the response efforts since they are more flexible than government agencies. Answer. B. A centralized command structure, such as an incident command system, should be established to streamline decision-making. Explanation. Disaster response requires efficient coordination between federal, state, and local authorities as well as private organizations. The incident command system is a standardized management structure that allows for clear communication, defined roles, and effective resource allocation. ICE is widely used in the US under FEMA's National Incident Management System (NIMS) to manage emergencies. Centralized command ensures resources are prioritized and that redundancies are reduced. Decentralized responses options and C often lead to inefficiencies and miscommunication. While NGOs play a crucial role, they cannot replace government-led coordination. Thus, B is the best answer. Question 12. During a high-profile legal dispute between a multinational technology company and a government agency, allegations of anti-competitive behavior arise. The company is accused of using its market dominance to prevent competitors from accessing essential technology. Under international competition law, which of the following best describes the legal implications? A. The company is free to use its competitive advantage, regardless of market impact. B. If the company's actions limit competition and harm consumers, it may violate antitrust laws. C. Governments have no authority to regulate private companies in global markets. D. The company can only be held accountable if it directly forces competitors out of business. Answer. B. If the company's actions limit competition and harm consumers, they may violate antitrust laws. Explanation. Competition antitrust laws exist to prevent monopolistic practices that harm consumers and restrict fair competition. The U.S. Sherman Act, a EU competition law, and similar laws worldwide prohibit dominant firms from abusing market power. Exclusionary practices, e.g., blocking competitors from critical technologies, can lead to fines, lawsuits, and regulatory action. Courts assess whether the behavior leads to reduced innovation, higher prices, or unfair market restrictions. Governments do regulate corporations in global markets, contrary to options. Since market dominance cannot be used to stifle competition, B is correct. Question 13. While evaluating a critical infrastructure vulnerability, cybersecurity experts discover that a nation-state-sponsored hacking group has infiltrated government networks. The attackers have remained undetected for months and may have accessed classified information. What is the most appropriate immediate response based on cybersecurity best practices? A. Shut down all affected networks immediately and notify the public. B. Conduct a forensic analysis while keeping the breach secret to avoid panic. C. Negotiate with the attackers to prevent further damage. D. Ignore the attack unless there is evidence of stolen data. Answer. B. Conduct a forensic analysis while keeping the breach secret to avoid panic. Explanation. Cyber attacks on government infrastructure require strategic responses based on cybersecurity best practices. Forensic analysis helps determine the scope and impact of the breach. Public disclosure without assessment, option A, can create panic and give attackers an advantage. Negotiating with hackers, option C, is not an effective deterrent. Ignoring the attack, option D, allows further exploitation. Thus, B is the correct answer. Question 14. During an economic downturn where financial markets experience extreme volatility, central banks must decide whether to intervene. If inflation remains high but economic growth is slowing, which monetary policy approach would be most appropriate? A. Lower interest rates to stimulate economic growth. B. Raise interest rates to control inflation, despite the risk of slowing growth further. C. Take no action and allow market forces to stabilize the economy. D. Print additional money to support government spending and consumer demand. Answer: B. Raise interest rates to control inflation despite the risk of slowing growth further. Explanation: this scenario represents stagflation, combination of high inflation and slow economic growth. Lowering interest rates, option A, could worsen inflation. Printing money, option D, would devalue currency and increase inflation. Inaction, option C, risks deepening the crisis. Thus, raising interest rates. B helps control inflation. It slows growth temporarily. Question 15. While developing new artificial intelligence regulations, lawmakers must address concerns about bias in AI decision-making. Which approach would be most effective in reducing AI bias? A. Require AI systems to be trained on diverse datasets and undergo regular audits. B. Prohibit AI in high-risk areas such as hiring and lending. C. Allow AI companies to self-regulate without government oversight. D. Assume AI will improve over time and take no action. Answer A. Require AI systems to be trained on diverse datasets and undergo regular audits. Explanation: AI systems often inherit biases from training data and algorithmic design. Diverse datasets reduce biased outcomes. Regular audits ensure AI compliance with fairness standards. Banning AI use cases. Option B ignores potential benefits. Self-regulation. Option C may lead to ethical lapses. Thus, there is the regulatory approach. Question 16. During an international trade negotiation, one country demands tariff reductions while the other insists on protecting domestic industries. What is the most effective compromise of WTO principles? A. Completely eliminate tariffs to promote free trade. B. Allow selective tariff reductions while providing safeguards for sensitive industries. C. Maintain all tariffs to protect national economies. D. Withdraw from negotiations if both sides cannot agree. Answer: B. Allow selective tariff reductions while providing safeguards for sensitive industries. Explanation: the World Trade Organization (WTO) encourages tariff reductions but allows for sectoral protections. Full tariff elimination, option A, may harm domestic industries. Tariff protections, option C, can lead to trade disputes. Walking away, option D, damages diplomatic relations. Thus, B balances trade openness and domestic interests. Question 17. While examining the impact of climate change on global supply chains, policymakers must develop adaptive strategies. Which of the following is the most effective response? A. Implement carbon taxes to reduce emissions and fund resilience efforts. B. Wait for the private sector to address supply chain vulnerabilities. C. Reduce trade dependence by enforcing strict import restrictions. D. Ignore climate-related disruptions and focus on short-term economic growth. And so A. Implement carbon taxes to reduce emissions and fund resilience efforts. Explanation: climate change disrupts global supply chains through extreme weather, rising sea levels, and resource shortages. Carbon taxes, option A, incentivize businesses to reduce emissions and fund resilience projects. Waiting for private solutions, option B, risks delayed action. Import restrictions, option C, reduce economic efficiency. Thus is the sustainable strategy. Question 18. During a large-scale cyber attack on financial institutions, the stock market experiences severe fluctuations as consumer confidence drops. What is the most effective immediate response for regulatory authorities to stabilize the financial system? A. Temporarily suspend stock market trading to prevent panic-driven sell-offs. B. Inject emergency liquidity into the banking system to maintain stability. C. Publicly announce that the situation is under control, even if the full extent is unknown. D. Let market forces naturally correct the instability without intervention. Answer: B. Inject emergency liquidity into the banking system to maintain stability. Explanation: a cyber attack on financial institutions can trigger a liquidity crisis and consumer panic. The best response is to inject emergency liquidity into the system to prevent bank runs and maintain confidence. Suspending stock market trading, option A, can delay but not prevent panic. Providing false assurances, option C, may damage credit. If the crisis worsens, allowing markets to self-correct. Option D, risk severe economic disruptions. Thus, B is the most effective response. Question 19. During a diplomatic standoff between two major world powers, tensions escalate over trade restrictions and military positioning. How should international organizations such as the United Nations respond to prevent conflict? A. Impose economic sanctions on both countries to pressure de-escalation. B. Facilitate diplomatic negotiations and confidence-building measures. C. Encourage military action to deter further escalation. D. Take no action and allow the countries to resolve the dispute independently. Answer. B. Facilitate diplomatic negotiations and confidence-building measures. Explanation. International organizations like the UN play a crucial role in preventing conflicts through diplomacy and conflict resolution mechanisms. Economic sanctions, option A, can worsen tensions. Military action, option C, risks full-scale war. Non-intervention, option D, allows the situation to escalate further. Thus, B, diplomatic engagement is the most effective approach. Question 20. During a global health crisis, public health officials struggle to distribute vaccines fairly across countries. What is the best strategy to ensure equitable access to vaccines? A. Allow pharmaceutical companies to sell vaccines at market-driven prices. B. Establish international partnerships and prioritize high-risk populations. C. Require countries to produce their own vaccines to avoid dependency. D. Distribute vaccines based on economic contributions to global markets. Answer. B. Establish international partnerships and prioritize high-risk populations. Explanation. Global health equity requires strategic vaccine distribution to prevent disease spread and protect vulnerable populations. Market-driven pricing, option A, limits access for low-income nations. National self-sufficiency, option C, is impractical for many countries. Distributing based on economic contributions, option D, public health priorities. Thus, B is the best ethical and practical approach. Question 21. While developing economic policies to reduce income inequality, governments must balance economic growth with social welfare. Which policy would be most effective? A. Implement progressive taxation and social programs to redistribute wealth. B. Lower corporate taxes to stimulate job creation and economic expansion. C. Eliminate welfare programs to encourage self-reliance. D. Allow market forces to determine income distribution without government interference. Answer A. Implement progressive taxation and social programs to redistribute wealth. Explanation. Reducing income inequality requires progressive taxation and targeted social programs to support lower-income individuals while maintaining economic growth. Lowering corporate taxes, option B, can increase wealth concentration. Eliminating welfare programs, option C, may worsen poverty. Market-driven solutions, option D, often exacerbate inequality. Thus is the most effective policy. Question 22. During an economic crisis, a government must decide how to allocate stimulus funds. Which approach is most likely to promote long-term economic recovery? A. Provide direct cash payments to all citizens to boost consumer spending. B. Invest in infrastructure and job creation programs. C. Reduce corporate taxes to stimulate business growth. D. Rely on free market forces without government intervention. Answer. B. Invest in infrastructure and job creation programs. Explanation. Stimulus funding should be used to create long-term economic growth, not just short-term relief. Direct cash payments, option A, help short-term demand, but do not create sustained economic impact. Corporate tax cuts, option C, do not guarantee job growth. No intervention, option D, risks a prolonged downturn. Thus, B, investing in infrastructure and jobs is the best strategy. Question 23. While designing urban policies to address climate change, city planners must balance environmental sustainability with economic development. What is the most effective approach? A. Implement strict environmental regulations while promoting green jobs. B. Focus solely on economic growth and address environmental issues later. C. Reduce regulations to attract business investment. D. Avoid direct intervention and let private companies develop solutions. Answer A. Implement strict environmental regulations while promoting green jobs. Explanation. Sustainable urban development requires a balance between economic growth and environmental responsibility. Delaying climate action, option B, leads to long-term damage. Deregulation, Option C may harm public health. Market-driven solutions, option D, are not always reliable, thus is the most effective policy. Question 24. During a national security crisis, intelligence agencies detect a credible cyber threat targeting critical infrastructure. What should be the immediate response? A. Conduct a preemptive cyber attack against suspected threat actors. B. Strengthen cyber defenses and coordinate with allied intelligence agencies. C. Shut down all government systems until the threat is eliminated. D. Take no action unless the attack is confirmed. Answer B. Strengthen cyber defenses and coordinate with allied intelligence agencies. Explanation. Cybersecurity threats require a coordinated and proactive response. Preemptive cyber attacks, option A, can escalate conflicts. Shutting down systems, option C, may disrupt essential services. Waiting for confirmation, option D, risks widespread damage. Thus, B, enhancing cyber defenses and collaboration is the best approach. Question 25. While responding to a global refugee crisis, international organizations must determine how to allocate limited resources. What is the most effective strategy? A. Prioritize aid to countries that contribute the most to international organizations. B. Focus on immediate humanitarian needs while developing long-term resettlement plans. C. Close borders to refugees to prevent economic strain on host nations. D. Allow wealthier nations to determine resource allocation. Answer B. Explanation. A balanced approach addresses immediate needs while ensuring long-term solutions. Prioritizing wealthier countries, option A, is unethical. Closing borders, option C, ignores human rights obligations. Wealthy nations alone, option D, may lead to biased allocation. Thus, B is the most effective response. Question 26. During an international energy crisis, global oil prices skyrocket and nations struggle to secure fuel supplies. What is the most effective strategy for governments to ensure energy security while maintaining economic stability? A. Increase domestic oil production while investing in renewable energy. B. Rely on foreign energy imports to meet immediate demand. C. Implement price controls to stabilize domestic fuel costs. D. Focus solely on long-term renewable energy development without addressing short-term shortages. Answer A. Increase domestic oil production while investing in renewable energy. Explanation. Energy security requires a balanced approach that addresses both short-term supply needs and long-term sustainability. Relying on imports, option B, can increase dependency on volatile markets. Price controls, option C, may lead to fuel shortages and black markets. Ignoring immediate shortages, option D, could cause economic disruptions. Is the best strategy to ensure both stability and sustainability. Question 27. While responding to a major financial scandal involving a multinational corporation, regulatory authorities must act quickly to restore public trust. What is the most effective response? A. Conduct a thorough investigation and enforce legal penalties if wrongdoing is found. B. Issue a public statement reassuring investors without taking immediate action. C. Allow the corporation to handle the situation internally without government interference. D. Provide financial support to prevent the company from collapsing regardless of the findings. Answer A. Conduct a thorough investigation and enforce legal penalties if wrongdoing is found. Explanation. Restoring public trust requires accountability and transparency. Issuing statements without action, option B, can undermine credibility. Letting the company self-regulate, option C, risks a cover-up. Bailing out the company unconditionally, option D, may encourage future misconduct. Thus, a thorough investigation and appropriate penalties are the best course of action. Question 28. During a severe drought affecting agricultural production, governments must decide how to allocate limited water resources. What is the most effective approach? A. Prioritize water for essential food crops while promoting water-efficient farming. B. Allow unrestricted water use, letting market forces determine distribution. C. Redirect all water resources to urban areas to support growing populations. D. Focus only on long-term solutions without addressing immediate agricultural needs. Answer A. Prioritize water for essential food crops while promoting water-efficient farming. Explanation. Drought management requires balancing food production, economic stability, and sustainability. Market-driven distribution, option B, may favor wealthier industries over essential needs. Redirecting all water to cities, option C, could cause food shortages. Focusing only on long-term solutions. Option D ignores urgent needs. Prioritizing essential crops and sustainable practices is the most effective policy. Question 29. While addressing a rising national debt crisis, policymakers must choose between economic growth and fiscal responsibility. What is the best strategy to reduce debt without harming the economy? A. Implement gradual spending cuts while investing in economic growth initiatives. B. Immediately impose harsh austerity measures to eliminate debt quickly. C. Ignore the debt and focus entirely on economic expansion. D. Rely solely on increasing taxes without addressing spending. Answer A. Implement gradual spending cuts while investing in economic growth initiatives. Explanation: debt reduction should not come at the cost of economic growth. Harsh austerity, option B, can slow the economy and increase unemployment. Ignoring debt, option C, risks long-term financial instability. Only raising taxes, option D, may discourage investment and growth. Thus, a balanced approach of spending cuts and growth investments is the best strategy. Question 30. During a major technological breakthrough in artificial intelligence, governments must decide how to regulate its use in critical industries. What is the most effective regulatory approach? A. Establish clear regulations while promoting innovation and ethical AI development. B. Ban AI in critical industries due to potential risks. C. Allow companies to regulate themselves without government oversight. D. Delay regulation until AI technology is fully developed. Answer A. Establish clear regulations while promoting innovation and ethical AI development. Explanation: AI regulation must balance innovation with ethical and security concerns. A total ban, option B, prevents potential benefits. Self-regulation, option C, can lead to misuse and ethical issues. Delaying regulation, option D, risks uncontrolled AI expansion, thus implementing responsible regulations while encouraging innovation. It's the best approach.